period from the late Bronze to early Iron Age brought significant changes to the ancient land of Canaan and the surrounding nations. These early populations faced significant challenges that led to their decline. We're going to talk about how they were conquered by invading groups like the Sea Peoples who disrupted the region and forced them to assimilate. We are continuing our discussion about the enemies in our land. They lived in the Promised Land long before the children of Israel were told to annihilate them and take the land. Scripture described those inhabitants that included a race of giants as wicked. Studies show that the ethnicity of the inhabitants of Canaan, Egypt, and the Levant changed significantly over time, and it prompted many to say that the Canaanites and other ancient populations simply disappeared. Now we know that most of them were dispersed, and others were whited out when they intermingled with the invading forces. Let's refer to this Eliot's expository from Bible Hub describing the sons of Noah. It says, "There is no doubt that Ham means black or sunburnt, and Japheth is probably fair-skinned." Now, if you look at that word in the Hebrew, it's actually talking about beautiful appearance, not white skin. When interpreted that way, there is no contradiction with the scientific evidence that says all of the original people had dark skin. It goes on to say that Shem has been compared with an Assyrian word, Samu, meaning brownish. Let's say that again. Shem had a brownish skin color. It says the three names appear to allude to differences of racial complexion. Let's point out that it says there is no doubt that Ham means black. If that's truly the case, then Ham's sons, to include Canaan, had dark melanated skin. That's the way the Egyptians, who are also descendants of Ham, describe them. This says the Egyptians depicted the Amorites and Hittites as having dark skin. Well, who are they? Children of Canaan. It says the Egyptians depicted them with dark skin. It goes on to say that this is supported by historical accounts where the Amorites were often portrayed with dark complexions, while the Hittites were similarly represented with darker skin tones in Egyptian art. This artistic representation highlights the cultural and racial perceptions of these ancient peoples during that time. So we have to ask the question, if they all started out with melanated skin, what caused their skin to turn white, and when did it happen? Because according to this information from Easton's Bible Dictionary, the Amorites were warlike mountaineers. They are represented on Egyptian monuments with fair skins, light hair, blue eyes, aquiline noses, and pointed beards. Now, don't miss this part. Their king, Og, is described by Moses as the last remnant of the giants. Let's just pause right there and consider that the king of the Amorites was a direct descendant of the fallen. So a hybrid race came in and invaded the land of Canaan. They had a different phenotype and had different DNA markers, but they took on the identity of Canaan's descendants. This article from All That History is telling us that it wasn't just Canaan's descendants. It says a study of ancient genes reveals a dark-skinned Europe until 3,000 years ago. It goes on to say that this study of ancient DNA has completely changed our understanding of the peoples who lived in the Stone Age and Bronze Age Europe. It was only about 1000 BC, well into the Iron Age, that we first saw light-skinned individuals emerge on the continent. Continuing, it says the previous theoretical consensus was that lightening pigmentation would evolve gradually and in a linear fashion in response to the different conditions in Europe. But this was not the case. It says there were other changes during the period which shed an interesting light on the evolution of Europeans. While the skin remained dark, eye color changed in a less predictable fashion. Eyes got paler until the Mesolithic, and this is talking about the Middle Stone Age between roughly 15,000 and 5,000 years ago. At this point, Europeans were predominantly dark-skinned and blue-eyed, and it says, as were the Neanderthals in the region. Now, the thing that we need to understand is that this was happening in Asia as well. In previous sessions, we talked about the fact that Europe is not a separate continent. They say that it is, but it's not. It shares landmass with Africa and Asia. Let's look at this from Atlanta Black Star. It's responding to questions about the black presence in China. The questions are, were there black people in China? If so, what became of them? And are they still there? The article says most of the population of modern China, we're talking about 1/5 of all the people living today, owes its genetic origins to Africa. From the realm of the physical anthropology of early China, according to the preeminent scholar in the field, Quan Chi Chang, he says that the skeletal remains going back to 10,000 to 2000 BCE are similar to those found in southwest China, and they bear oceanic negroid features. Pause and think on that. It says the first black people in China then, the people who are probably the first of any people in China, were apparently black people, akin to the Batwa of Central Africa and the people of the Andaman Islands today. He says we call them the diminutive Africoids, and the Chinese call them black dwarfs in early southern China during the period of the Three Kingdoms. The article goes on to say that these diminutive Africoids inhabit the Andaman Islands, a remote archipelago east of India, and are direct descendants of the first modern humans to have inhabited Asia, geneticists conclude in new studies. They are described as being short, with dark skin, peppercorn hair or woolly hair, and large buttocks, and these are characteristics of the African pygmies. This says similar groups of black people have been identified in Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia, and it seems almost certain that at one time a belt of black populations of this type covered much of Asia, including early China and especially southern China. It says there is little doubt that in the early ages of China, a black presence was prevalent. The article goes on to name 3 African dynasties in particular that stand out, and it says it's the Shang, Tang, and Wen dynasties. Now let's go back to an article we talked about previously about the Sea Peoples, who they were and how they devastated the ancient world. This article says their identity and origins remain mysterious to this day, much like the origins and identity of the Khazars. You know the story. We really don't know why they disappeared or who their descendants are today. It says 13th and 12th century sources describe several attacks from these oceanic raiders. The sea peoples seemingly struck places in Egypt, the Hittite Empire, the Levant, and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Ancient sources give them various names, including Dinyan, Ekwesh, Luca, Peliset, Shekelish, Sheridan, Teresh, Zeker, and Weshesh. Now let's circle back to the Pelashet for a bit, because we know that these particular people had direct ties to the fallen and their descendants. They are the Philistines. This information comes from Arab America. It's entitled Peliset, Philistine, and the Etymology of the Holy Land. This says the most sound connection is to the word Peliset, represented as Prist in hieroglyphics. Peliset was first mentioned in 1150 BCE within an inscription from the 20th dynasty of Egypt, referring to Peliset as a neighboring group or area. Later, the temple at Medinet Habu shows that the Peliset had previously been at war with Egypt. Though mentioned in writing by both the Egyptians and the Assyrians, Peliset was never given a designated boundary line. The Peliset could also be connected to the Sea Peoples. These were an unknown union of tribes acknowledged in Egyptian and Assyrian inscriptions. So the word Palestine is thought to have appeared first in the writings of Herodotus as a replacement for the term Canaan. Don't miss that point for those who wondered why the name of the land changed from Canaan to Palestine. So it says, written in the 5th century BCE, Palestine is referred to as a district of Syria. A handful of Roman, Greek, and Hebrew writers adopted the term in their writing after the histories, this book written by Herodotus. It says Palestine, however, is not found on any sort of official coinage or inscriptions from the Hellenistic period. Many conclude that the name Palestine originates from this text, and that the region was referred to as something else by those inhabiting it. So technically, the name changed to the dominant ruling power. But let's not miss the connection that the original descendants had been subjugated. Continuing, it says, a differing argument involves the Philistines, known in the Old Testament as a neighbor and enemy of the Israelites. The Philistines' origin is not entirely clear. Here we go again. Both the Hebrew Bible and the Septuagint insinuate that the Philistines are Greek or Southern European migrants. A study released in 2019 states that after testing DNA from an ancient Philistine burial site in Ashkelon, early Iron Age subjects were distinguished from later Iron Age subjects due to a distinct European-related admixture. Once again, we see that these modern folks are identity thieves. They are the great pretenders. It says before and after this period, subjects were found to be part of the local Levantine gene pool, insinuating that the immigrants were marrying into the Levantine population. And who are they today? Well, let's look at this article from the Times of Israel. It's entitled, Know Thine Enemy. DNA study solves ancient riddle of origins of the Philistines. A groundbreaking new study of DNA, taken from the bones of ancient residents of the coastal city of Ashkelon, has put to rest a centuries-old debate surrounding the origins of the kingdom of Israel's most reviled foes, the Philistines. According to a paper published in Science Advances, the ancestors of Goliath of Gath immigrated from southern Europe. Ancient DNA sheds light on the genetic origins of early Iron Age Philistines. The study proves that coinciding with the arrival of the Philistines in Ashkelon in the 12th century BCE, there was an influx of southern European genetic material in the local population. So they were not there before the 12th century. Well, where were they? They came from the far north and began invading areas in Asia, Europe, Northeast Africa, and other areas. Now, whatever your beliefs are about where our land is, Scripture is clear that our ancestors had encounters with the Philistines. Whether you believe that the land is that strip of land over there, or in Northeast Africa or South Africa, giants were in the land of Canaan before our people were told to go in and take it. Now let's look at this article from the Jerusalem Post. It says modern Jews and Arabs retain more than half their ancestry from Bronze Age Canaanites. Let me draw your attention to the most important word in the title, modern. Modern Jews and Arabs. The article says a new ancient DNA survey of human remains from 9 southern Levantine sites indicates that present-day Ish people and Arab-speaking communities typically derive at least 50% of the genomes from Bronze Age inhabitants of the region who shared a common Canaanite material culture. Among the ancient remains, 3 individuals interred together at Megiddo stand out. Their genomes carry markedly higher Caucasus-related ancestry than their neighbors. So proof that these modern groups are technically Indo-Europeans. They are not the direct descendants of the original people. Now, the article that we read earlier told us that the invading forces took over the land of Canaan, Egypt, Asia, and Assyria. Let's just focus on Egypt for a bit because this is going to be pertinent to what was happening in Egypt in the centuries before our ancestors went in to take the land. As I said in the last session, the landscape was already changing. Let's look at this passage from the 46th chapter of the book of Jubilees. It tells us that after Jacob died, the children of Israel multiplied in Egypt, and they became a great nation. It says, and they were of one accord in heart, so that brother loved brother, and every man helped his brother. And they increased abundantly and multiplied exceedingly. There's a message in that. It goes on to say, and there was no Satan nor evil all the days of the life of Joseph, which he lived after his father Jacob. For all the Egyptians honor the children of Israel all the days of the life of Joseph. So you would think it would not have been easy for the Egyptians to forget him. Let's go on. Verse 3. And Joseph died, being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan, and 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison, and 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt. And he died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And he commanded the children of Israel before he died, that they should carry his bones with them when they went forth from the land of Egypt. And he made them swear regarding his bones, for he knew that the Egyptians would not again bring forth and bury him in the land of Canaan. For Macamaron, king of Canaan, let's pause there. Macamaron, king of Canaan, while dwelling in the land of Assyria, fought in the valley with the king of Egypt and slew him there, and pursued after the Egyptians to the gates of Ermon. But he was not able to enter, for another, a new king, had become king of Egypt, and he was stronger than he, and he returned to the land of Canaan. And it says, and the gates of Egypt were closed, and none went out, and none came into Egypt. And Joseph died in the 46th Jubilee, in the 6th week, in the 2nd year, and they buried him in the land of Egypt, and all his brethren died after him. And the king of Egypt went forth to war with the king of Canaan. So we're talking about a later date. In the 47th Jubilee, in the 2nd week, in the 2nd year, and the children of Israel brought forth all the bones of the children of Jacob, save the bones of Joseph, and they buried them in the field in the double cave in the mountain. And the most of them returned to Egypt, but a few of them remained in the mountains of Hebron. And Amram, thy father, speaking about the father of Moses, remained with them. Now listen to this. And the king of Canaan was victorious over the king of Egypt, and he closed the gates of Egypt. And he devised an evil device against the children of Israel, of afflicting them. And he said unto the people of Egypt, behold, the people of the children of Israel have increased and multiplied more than we. Come and let us deal wisely with them before they become too many, and let us afflict them with slavery before war come upon us, and before they too fight against us. Else they will join themselves unto our enemies and get them up out of our land. Listen to this. For their hearts and their faces are towards the land of Canaan. So he already knew that they were going to go in and take the land of Canaan. Verse 14, and he set over them taskmasters to afflict them with slavery, and they built strong cities for Pharaoh, Pithom, and Ramses, and they built all the walls and all the fortifications which had fallen in the cities of Egypt, and they made them serve with rigor. And the more they dealt evilly with them, the more they increased and multiplied. And the people of Egypt abominated the children of Israel. Now, if you try to find information on which pharaonic dynasty was in power when the children of Israel went into captivity, you may get several different responses. Some will say it was during the 13th century BCE, specifically during the 19th dynasty of ancient Egypt. And this period is often associated with the Pharaoh who enslaved the Israelites, leading to their exodus under the leadership of Moses. Now let's look at this from Exodus 1, 6 through 10. It says, and Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Why didn't this new king know Joseph? We'll get to that. It goes on to say, and he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. Now let's look at Isaiah 52. And you need to know that the 52nd chapter of Isaiah is a dual prophecy. It's pointing to something that happened in the past and something like it will happen in the future. But I want us to focus on verse 4. It says, "For thus says the Most High Yah, my people went down at first into Egypt to dwell there." Don't miss that. They didn't go into Egypt as slaves. But when you compare this to Deuteronomy 28:68, the people are to go back into Egypt as slaves. This is why I'm telling you that this is a dual prophecy. Now listen to what the Most High says. "My people went down at first into Egypt to dwell there. Then the Assyrian oppressed them without cause." This Assyrian was ruling as a pharaoh, but he was not a descendant of Ham. Hopefully, you're seeing as we dig into this information that when the invaders came in, they took on the identity of those they conquered, particularly if that nation had a powerful history. Think about Revelation 2:9, and remember that Assyria and Egypt were taken over by invading forces. This Britannica article says in 1208 BCE, Libyans and 5 other groups, the Shardana, Shekelesh, Arkwasha, Luka, and Tertia, invaded the Nile Delta. An inscription on a wall erected by the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah in the temple of Amun in Karnak, or at Karnak, describes the Libyans' allies as northerners or of the countries of the sea. So modern scholars have come to call these invaders the sea peoples. And then it talks about these people who behaved like pirates, conducting raids on coastal towns in Cyprus and Syria. And these raids were conducted by the Luka people. They launched their surprise attacks by sea, occasionally pillaging Egypt's coast. This says about a generation after the Libyan Sea people's invasion of Egypt, Ramses III met an even greater menace. Heading toward Egypt was a coalition of marauding groups that had progressed through Anatolia and northern Syria. Inscriptions and reliefs on Ramses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu record the threat. This is what he said. He said the foreign countries made a conspiracy in their lands. They had already decided what they were going to do before they left the far north. It says, all at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. Speaking about Hatti, the Hittite Empire, Cilicia, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Cyprus. It says a camp was set up in one place in Amurru, or coastal Syria. It says they desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. They were coming forward toward Egypt while the flame was prepared before them, and let's remember that the sea peoples were a mixed group, a hybrid group, and they had the giants in their midst. So it names them, and then it says that they lay their hands upon the land as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting that their plans would succeed. This goes on to say that Ramses III defeated the Sea People's army probably in Canaan. The Sea People's fleet, however, sailed on to Egypt where it was decimated by the Egyptians. But soon after the death of Ramses III, Egypt lost control over Canaan. It says because more sea peoples arrived and they gained control over a number of coastal sites in the Levant. I'll drop down. It says, according to the Bible, the Philistines came to Canaan from Caphtor. Other biblical texts refer to the Philistines as Kerethites, probably Cretans. Let's look at this from World History Encyclopedia. It says no ancient inscription names the coalition as sea peoples. This is a modern day designation first coined by the French Egyptologist Gaston Maspero in 1881 CE. Maspero came up with the term because the ancient reports claim that these tribes came from the sea or from the islands, but they never say which sea or which islands, and so the sea people's origin remains unknown. The three great pharaohs who record their conflicts and victories over the sea peoples are Ramses II and his son Meremta and Ramses III. All three claimed great victories over their adversaries, and their inscriptions provide the most detailed evidence of the sea peoples. Thankfully, they did preserve those records because it gives us a more accurate picture of how those people from the far north established themselves in the region and basically whited out the original inhabitants. We're going to see from this article that since the war was declared in Genesis 3:15, there has been an ongoing attempt to either destroy or mingle the seed of Adam to the point that it is no longer recognizable. That plan was already in operation when we became a nation. After we became a nation, we were the main target, and the neighboring countries played a part in that. And we can see that in Psalm 83. Let's look at this from the Collector. It's entitled, "What Role Did the Sea Peoples Play in the Bronze Age Collapse?" This says, in the late 13th century and early 12th centuries BCE, the kingdoms and city-states of the eastern Mediterranean basin were devastated by a series of attacks. The people leading the attacks were a collection of disparate tribes who sometimes aligned while at other times worked alone. These tribes became collectively known as the Sea Peoples, based on Egyptian texts that refer to them as the people beyond the sea. So they were basically unknown to the Egyptians. It goes on to say that during the late Bronze Age, a geopolitical system formed in the eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, known by modern scholars as the Great Powers Club. Are you familiar with that term? It says the most constant members of the club were Egypt, Hatti, Kassite Babylon, and Cyprus. It says Mitanni was an early member that was replaced by Assyria, and Arzawa may have also been a member. The great powers arranged diplomatic marriages, trade agreements, and military alliances with each other. The smaller Canaanite city-states of the Levant, Syria-Palestine area were subordinate members and sometimes fought over as proxies, especially between the Egyptians and Hittites. But major conflicts were, for the most part, avoided. The article goes on to say that the correspondence between the great powers was documented in a collection of Akkadian cuneiform tablets known as the Amarna letters. Some of you may have already read those. We'll take a look at them in another session. But it says, the letters detail how the kings of the major kingdoms referred to each other as equals, while the Canaanite kings were treated as inferiors. And if we think about Noah's curse on Canaan, he said Canaan would be a servant to his brothers. So this says the documents also demonstrate how the borders were more or less open from Egypt to Persia and from the Black Sea to the Red Sea for trade. The kingdom of Elam and Mycenaeans were also involved in the system, although they are not mentioned in the Amarna letters. It says the system brought peace, stability, and prosperity to millions of people. but it quickly collapsed in the late 13th century. So what happened? The Sea People happened. They had unsuccessfully attempted to invade Egypt twice. When you look at the images on this face, it gives us a picture of what those people looked like. So for historians to claim that they don't really know who they are is very telling. I'll drop down. It says, when the Sea People's invasions finally ended, the Mediterranean and Near East had drastically changed. It didn't look the same. It says the Medinet Habutek states that the Sea Peoples destroyed the Hittites' kingdom as well as the Levantine cities. They ravaged Cyprus and other cities in the region. This says the Sea Peoples were clearly the weapon that destroyed the Bronze Age system. What were they trying to do? Corrupt the bloodline and take on the identity of the seed of Adam. So we have to understand that when we read scripture, there are times when the prophecies are talking about the land and the original inhabitants, or it may be referring to those who are ruling over it. We can look at the example of the Assyrian who was using the title of Pharaoh. Because he was ruling in Egypt, the assumption would be that he was an Egyptian, but he wasn't. The same thing happened when Alexander the Greek's general took over Egypt. They took on the identity of Pharaoh, but they were Greek. But now we see that a lot of the mummies have European features. So let's look at this from Isaiah 19:23 through 25. The prophecy speaks of a future where Egypt, Assyria, and Israel will come together in worship and peace, symbolizing a significant transformation in the region. This prophecy is indicating a time will come where they will reconcile, and it reflects the Most High's plan for peace among nations. This has not happened yet, but I find it interesting that Egypt and Assyria are the two nations named, a son of Shem and a son of Ham. In the scripture, Egypt is closely associated with the children of Ham, and it frequently refers to Egypt as the land of Ham, even though the sons of Ham lived in other areas in and around Africa and the so-called Middle East. For example, when you read Psalm 105:23, it mentions Jacob sojourning in the land of Ham, meaning Egypt. We also know that Israel was sent to Egypt during a time of great famine. Abraham went to Egypt during a famine, and then Joseph was told to take Messiah there. So in a sense, Egypt served as a place of refuge at times. When we look at Assyria, Assyria was one of the most powerful nations to descend from Shem in terms of its military and imperial dominance in the ancient Near East. So it can be seen as a representation of Shem's descendants. Jacob, of course, descended from Shem, but he is also the called out one because his descendants are the Most High's portion. And here we have Israel, Egypt, and Assyria mentioned in this prophecy. It's curious that we don't see Japheth represented. Just food for thought. We'll end it here and continue the discussion next time. If this message has been a blessing to you, please hit the like and share it. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.